Hello and welcome to Natasha Explains It All. Today's episode is special. I have a guest with me today, Josh Barousse from San Jose Spotlight. I haven't had a guest in a while, so I am excited for this episode. And as I mentioned, our guest today is Josh Barousse from San Jose Spotlight, who is a personal friend as well as the co-founder of San Jose Spotlight, which is a nonprofit local newspaper that covers Silicon Valley / South Bay Area, California news. So excited to have Josh with us today. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Natasha, for having me.
So we are going to talk about the current media landscape. We're going to talk about the importance of local journalism and through one example. And I've talked about San Jose Spotlight on this podcast before, but today we get a much deeper dive into the work that they're doing, as well as how this relates to how all of us are navigating the current moment in the United States. So just a little bit of background. Josh and I met, in 2012, also
Right.
related to Silicon Valley. We met through a leadership institution called the New Leaders Council. We were part of the same cohort. And did you know back then that this might be something you would get into?
Absolutely not.
Uh,
Definitely a new venture for me.
I think at the time, were you working in city politics? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, exactly. I was actually working for a member of the state legislature, and that's really where my background was in local government politics and working for elected officials and on political campaigns.
And then, so what led then to the transition in 2019 to co-found San Jose Spotlight with your wife, right? Ramona Gawargis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, interesting story. So Ramona was, she's a journalist by trade. She was actually the Mercury News City Hall reporter back when we first met in 2016. I was working for a member of the San Jose City Council. And then, initially I was a source, and then we became friends. And then we actually moved out to Las Vegas. Ramona took a job at the Las Vegas Review Journal as a government and politics reporter. And in Nevada, that's where we discovered the Nevada Independent, which is a fellow nonprofit news organization. And the more we saw like the type of journalism they were writing was very hard hitting accountability journalism, and we learned like that concept. It was a novel concept of nonprofit news, and we figured, hey, if this model works here in Nevada, why can't it work in Silicon Valley? So we both quit our jobs. Let's see, that was in early 2019, and moved back to the Bay Area and started San Jose Spotlight in January of 2019. We both lived off of savings for 6 months. But yeah, overall, it's been a good combination with her and her journalism background and me and my government politics background. She handled the editorial side, and I handled all the fundraising and community partnerships, coordinating all of our events. And since then, we've started just with Ramona and myself and a string of freelance reporters. And fast forward 6 years later, now we're a team of 11 full-time employees. And we published more than 7,000 stories on our news site over the last 6 years.
That's amazing. What an accomplishment. And also, what a perfect match of your two different backgrounds to be able to launch, as you were saying, something that was
Thank
a
you.
relatively new concept in 2019. And I'm glad it was, January of 2019 and not January 2020 when you guys launched this venture. So did you feel like you had your footing by the time the pandemic hit?
For sure. And absolutely. And that's the thing, myself, we'd only been in Vegas at that time for 18 months. And I told Ramona, well, like we just started these new jobs, like, maybe we can give a little more time and, before we launch this new venture. But, she's very type A. So she's very adamant. No, we got to do this now. Who knows what can happen? So yeah, you just take a leap of faith. Just gotta jump in, and start your venture. And you're right, just a year later with the pandemic, it would have made things harder to really get off the ground. But the interesting thing is during that time, in early 2020, we saw our readership increase like our page views spiked, and a lot of we also our revenue. We got a lot of reader donations in 2020, just because
Interesting.
again the coronavirus and COVID-19 was just so new and novel to our readers. They relied on us to tell them what was going on, and with our wall to wall coverage on the pandemic locally in Santa Clara County, they readers really saw value and they learned what was going on just through our reporting.
That's so interesting. And yeah, that's the timing ended up being quite fortuitous. So yeah, I'm glad Ramona was so insistent.
Yeah,
And yeah, that allowed you to be in a good position to be a trustworthy source of information during the pandemic when I know this continues to be an issue about people feeling like they're struggling to find trustworthy sources of information. So,
right.
do you feel like because of the work that you guys did during the pandemic and building, a loyal readership, that's helping you navigate times right now?
For sure. No, absolutely. Especially now, with the current administration and, a lot of their decisions at the federal level, we were able to write on what it means locally. For example, we just wrote a pretty in-depth story about what, folks should do if they ever interact ICE, officials, locally. It was just kind of an explainer piece. And that was our top read story for, I think, 2 to 3 weeks. So
Oh,
things like
wow.
that, yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
So yeah, just again, how like those decisions are made at the federal level, how they're impacting our readers here locally, really, I think just cuts through the noise because they see what's going on just through watching TV news and other national outlets, but really like on the ground, hearing from residents who have been impacted or hearing from local government officials who are kind of implementing what's going on at the national level really kind of helps cut through the noise and helps readers understand really what it means for them.
Yeah, and I guess for listeners who may not be familiar with San Jose Spotlight, this covers predominantly Santa Clara County
Right.
news. And for those who aren't familiar, Santa Clara County is where Silicon Valley is, or most of it. I guess it depends on who you ask, but
Yeah.
um, it does not include San Francisco, and it's where San Jose is. I would say I think you would agree, right? And that's why it's called San Jose Spotlight, right? Like San Jose is kind of like the unofficial capital of Santa Clara County and
Yeah.
where a lot of the tech companies, well, I guess a lot are in like Santa Clara and the other cities, but San Jose is like the epicenter of Santa Clara County, hence the name, right? San Jose Spotlight, was that the motivation behind the name?
Exactly. And Ramona and I both are San Jose natives. We grew up in San Jose, went to local schools, both graduated from San Jose State. So before we launched back in 2018, we're, kind of making the rounds, talking to mentors, talking to, stakeholders, trying to get funding, seed funding to launch our new site. And a lot of people, they urged us to call it Silicon Valley Spotlight. But again, just as being San Jose natives, we really wanted to pay homage to our hometown of San Jose. So many organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, changed their name from San Jose to the Silicon Valley organization, excuse me, several years ago. During that time, the San Jose Mercury News changed their name to the Mercury News, and they wanted to expand more regionally. The Business Journal, they went from San Jose Business Journal to the Silicon Valley Business Journal. So we wanted to ensure that we're, really kind of paying homage again to our hometown and just, letting folks understand that San Jose is a major city. It actually has a larger population than San Francisco. It's at the time it was the nation's 10th largest city, the largest city in Northern California. And as you alluded to, it's the county seat in Santa Clara County and the capital of Silicon Valley. So when we first launched, more than 6 years ago, we just covered San Jose and Santa Clara, city of Santa Clara. And then just over the last 2 years, we've expanded our footprint. So now we're reporting in cities like Sunnyvale, Milpitas, and then out in the West Valley, like Cupertino, Los Gatos, Campbell. And next year in 2026, we're looking to also expand down to South County to include the cities of Gilroy and Morgan Hill.
That's so interesting. And I love, yeah, knowing about how strategic of a decision it was to call it San Jose Spotlight. And yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see as you expand I guess, the intersection of expanding down to South County. And for listeners who may not know, South County has a lot more agriculture,
Right.
which is being impacted significantly by federal politics on various fronts. So I think that'll be really important and
Yeah.
interesting to see how that coverage develops.
For sure. Yeah, it's certainly a news desert. It's again, as you alluded to, it's a very rural, communities. So yeah, we hope we can get down there and make an impact with some local reporting.
So, and then speaking of the impact of local reporting, um, I'd like to talk about, you know, as listeners know, right, the current media landscape seems really tough. We know that a lot of the major newspapers in the United States are owned by literal billionaires, or major newspapers have been so consolidated that they are not, they're more reluctant to do more hard hitting pieces, or just don't have the staff to be able to look into things, or their incentives are such that they feel like they don't want to rock the boat and are having much more um, conservative coverage. And I don't even mean conservative in the political sense, but just, not digging in too much because they don't want to draw attention to themselves. And so, do you find that being a nonprofit news outlet allows you to be more independent, and why, if that's the case?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, 100%. But the harsh reality is that from 2004 to 2024, over the last 20 years, more than 3,200 local publications have closed throughout the country, creating news deserts. And that's part of why the main reason why we're here is to really fill a gap in local news coverage in San Jose and Santa Clara County. And the Mercury News, the daily paper of record, the legacy paper, in Silicon Valley and Santa Clara County, they're now they were bought and owned by a hedge fund. So all they care about is bottom line. So they've shed so many positions. They've really shrunk their newsroom. Again, they're no longer the Sounds of Mercury News. They changed their title to the Mercury News. They not only shrunk, but they also try to expand, regionally. So, and then they're all just based their revenues based on subscriptions and ad revenue. And the harsh reality is that that's now a broken model. It just can't rely solely on ad revenue or subscriptions. We want to ensure as a nonprofit that we made sure that our reporting was all easily accessible and free. You can access our stories for free on our website, and reader donations are one of the main drivers of how we generate revenue. We're part of the fastest growing model in journalism, the nonprofit model. There are now there's now 475 nonprofit news organizations throughout the country. And again, a lot of them are just like us. They're coming, popping up in news deserts and really filling that gap in local news. And to answer your question, I would say yes. We do, solicit donations from readers and major donors. Again, a major gift is anything $1,000 or more. But us and others were part of the Institute for Nonprofit News, kind of the umbrella organization for all of us. And a requirement to be a member of the Institute for Nonprofit News is we had to adopt a policy of donor transparency, which is actually on our website. It states that regardless of how much anyone contributes, whether it's $1 or $10,000, that they can't be shaping coverage in any way. And we also list all of our donors who have
Mm.
donated $1,000 or more through our lifetime over the last 6 years. They're all listed on our website. So we have that true donor transparency on our website. And right, the harsh reality is that when you're independent, we've had advertising partners or donors that we had to write critical stories about, but frankly, they understand. Like, nobody ever asked us to write favorable stories or asked for special treatment. So luckily, it's been an effective model we found in Silicon Valley, and community understands. So yeah, so we look forward to really continue just providing accountability reporting and hard hitting journalism.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wanted to talk more about the funding model, because it's interesting, as you were saying, that at least in my circles, I've definitely been hearing people talking about how the subscription model, not just for news, but for anything like, for your entertainment services or for Patreon or Substack or
Yeah.
whatever, it's a model that is starting to, as you were saying, like starting to like wear out its life or something, because I think a lot of people are trying to find reliable, credible, independent sources. But it can be a lot if you're adding up all those things. And so it's interesting to consider how a non-subscription base or non-ad revenue, or as you were saying, you guys do get some ad revenue, but it's not your major source of funding.
Correct.
Um,
Yeah.
so maybe like for the listener as well, I think sometimes people wonder like how much actually makes a difference. So if someone's like, okay, I want to support San Jose Spotlight or whatever my local, independent newspaper is, like how much actually makes a difference. And I know it's like everything matters. We accept all
Yeah.
contributions, but a little bit more about, what is actually sustainable for an organization like yours.
Great. Yeah, great question. And Sounds like Spotlight, we're Silicon Valley's first and only nonprofit news organization. And you're right, I think that was it was still a new concept for a lot of our audience, for our readers when we first launched. And a lot of them weren't used to donating to a local news publication. Um, Again, it's still a novel concept in Silicon Valley. So to answer your question, I would say even $5 a month goes a long way. And we always had that pitch, it's the same price of a cup of coffee. So even $5 a month, at a sustained level, just so something that's recurring and it's kind of set and forget it. That's very reliable. It's a very reliable revenue stream for us. Um, and year after year, it just certainly makes a difference from all of our readers. Um, in addition to that, we also have major donors. We have event revenue. Just we solicit sponsorships from local businesses and organizations to sponsor some of our events, which are normally educational forums, like panel discussions and onstage interviews on important topics that are affecting the community. I mentioned, ad revenue that we do advertise on our news site and in our newsletter products. And then it's also coupled with a major donors. Again, that's a gift of $1,000 or more from an individual. And lastly, uh, we also have philanthropic support, from foundations both local, regionally, and nationally, to help support our mission and really help our cause.
That's awesome. And I guess this is a perfect spot in the episode for me for full transparency for all listeners. I have been a donor to San Jose Spotlight. So I am
Thank
not
you.
being paid for this interview, but it's important. I wouldn't be promoting this. I try to, whenever I, talk about people or products or anything on this podcast, I really do try to only talk about things I personally support. And so San Jose
Thank you.
Spotlight is one of the independent news sources that I have financially supported. Some others that I know I've talked about on the podcast include Rewired News, which is a national outlet that's more focused on reproductive rights, if folks are interested in that, and some independent solo journalists, including Judd Legum and Oliver Willis. So just
Nice.
wanted to throw that out there before we continue. But yeah, it's interesting to think about how the consolidation of the news has led to, obviously, as you were saying, like a lot of news outlets have just disappeared altogether, but then some have taken on the tact of turning nonprofit to be sustainable. You mentioned
For
that
sure.
foundations are a portion of your funding. I know that some foundations are feeling some of the heat from the federal government on all of this, very racist anti-DEI stuff or whatever the issue may be. And so there have been some foundations who are feeling a bit squeamish at the moment or being, cautious about how things are framed. Has that impacted you guys at all?
Luckily, no. I mean, uh, we don't rely on any government funding. Uh, I don't know what some foundations, and they're pretty large national foundations like the American Journalism Project, Knight Foundation, Heising Simons Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, MacArthur Foundation. They haven't, expressed any challenges as far as any cuts in federal spending. So we look to be in good shape in that regard. But yeah, it's a very important part. I enjoy watching PBS NewsHour every evening, and right, you kind of see the list of all the donors and foundations who kind of help support their national news. And
Right.
yeah, absolutely. It's I think that's just what, again, that's why this model is the fastest growing trend in journalism, the nonprofit model. Again, with nearly 500 nonprofit news organizations throughout the country, they're realizing, yeah, that journalism is more. It should be viewed more as a public cause than just local news. Because not only are we educating readers, but at the same time, we're really igniting civic engagement.
Right.
There's been studies that show that when local reporting goes away, government corruption goes up, voter participation goes down, and misappropriation of public spending goes up. So that's why it's critical that we support local journalism and see that it really is kind of a vital cause, just like we support our local library or parks or museum. It's just another public cause for us to support. And we've seen, again, I referenced PBS, and there's NPR, and locally we have KQED, but the nonprofit model has been running for a long time, and I think it's just we're going to see that trend in journalism growing over the next several years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can even, corroborate with my own experience the importance of local journalism in covering issues. I know that one of the cases I worked on in a previous role, folks can look this up, that this is in Indiana. There was local news coverage that revealed, as you were talking about, like local corruption of a local government contractor that was providing drug testing for the local county court system, and some questionable practices happening around that contract and the services that they were providing. And that was the Courier and Press, which is a local newspaper in Indiana, that did a big series on this on ABK, and their coverage was essential to that investigation about what was happening there. And as a separate matter, I did not work on this, but there was, again, another criminal justice example in the juvenile justice space. There was a local newspaper, this was several years ago in Pennsylvania. I don't remember the name of the newspaper, but the newspaper covered a scheme between one of the local juvenile judges and the contractor for one of the juvenile jails. And the judge was getting kickbacks for sending kids to this detention facility that he had given an exclusive contract to his friend for. Anyway, it was this massive scandal. There's a documentary about it. If people want to watch it, it's called Kids for Cash. And all of that was only possible because of local journalism and a local investigative reporter who looked into that closely.
Right on.
Yeah.
I remember hearing about that case, on your podcast several years ago.
Yeah. So, yes. So here too, the importance of local journalism. Is there an example that you would want to share about, something that some, local corruption or nefariousness? I mean, I know that San Jose Spotlight has sued the city of San Jose. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, but if maybe there's an example that you're willing to share about, yeah, what, given your position as a nonprofit outlet, that you would feel more at liberty to shine that spotlight than other organizations might be more reluctant to?
For sure. And you're right. Those are some great examples of the power of local journalism and really the kind of the impact we have on the local community. So we did sue the city of San Jose and former Mayor Sam Liccardo, back in 2023, and we won. We actually won the case. What happened was there was a community member who reached out to Mayor Sam Liccardo on a particular issue, and he actually responded and told that community member to email him on his personal email. And as elected as public officials, it's very important that they remain transparent, especially when it's dealing with city business. So we knew that him and others were using their personal emails, so we used the California Public Records Act, to request records on conversations, with community members, and we requested them, and we actually had a back channel, interacting with that individual and the other community members. So we knew that there were particular emails and documents that existed, but the city, after several public records requests, they said that they didn't have any record of those conversations, even though we knew we had them. And yeah, so we sued. We actually hired an attorney. Carl Olson was a very well known, public interest and First Amendment attorney based in San Francisco, and we won. It was very much a David versus Goliath, battle, and it just kind of shows that we're paying attention, that we're here to hold our government officials accountable, and that's one example that where journalism really had an impact. Also, just last year, the city of San Jose built tiny homes that were riddled with mold. And until a whistleblower actually notified us, we looked into it and we found that these were unsafe conditions for unhoused residents to be living in these tiny homes. So it forced the city of San Jose to recall those homes and have to re-renovate them. We've also some other examples are the city's planning commission. It's the panel or commission that has the most power in San Jose. It's a very powerful panel where it's a 7-member panel where they look at land use projects they're going to come before the council, and they make recommendations and advisory board to the San Jose City Council. Well, we found that the body, the members who made up this governing board were all white, and they all resided in the same area of town. And it really lacked diversity, really lacked the reflection of what San Jose's demographic makeup really is. So when we reported on that, the city of San Jose, the city council actually, made changes to how they were going to appoint officials to this board. And that way you have more diverse perspectives, on these projects when they make recommendations to the city council. So those are some examples that we like to share. Also, there was a gentleman who was running. He was actually a director on the Santa Clara Valley Water Board, and he was actually running for the county assessor. But we found that there was some assault going on, sexual assault going on his campaign, and we exposed it and wrote about what was going on. He actually dropped out of the race. So those are some examples that we like to we generally share when we're on programs like this.
Well, thank you for that important coverage. And yeah, I think it really speaks to the point that it really takes local journalists to be able to have the time and resources and access to be able to, I mean, these are very, not that they're not important. I'm just saying they're very niche. You're going into very local races, very local issues. And, a lot of larger outlets just don't have the bandwidth, to do that. Or they might have, I know there some great larger outlets like ProPublica that might spend years,
right,
following one issue to really create like an in-depth series. So it can be hard to be following, one local race or one, local development project. And on that example, that reminded me of something else I wanted to ask about. That I think one of the things, at least what I've observed, that's unique about San Jose Spotlight is some of the recurring columns that you have. And one of
Right.
them, for example, you have like an unhoused resident of the county who has a recurring column. I mean, I know that some of the larger newspapers might have like a guest column every once in a while, or might publish an op-ed, from someone who is unhoused or otherwise, receiving some type of social service. But I haven't seen a lot where it's a regular feature and a regular contribution to sharing different perspectives on, uh, for those who don't live in this area, it's probably like the number one or number two issue, housing and homelessness. And so providing other perspectives. So yeah, I'd be curious to know more about like the decision behind that column and your other, standing guest column pieces.
No doubt. Yeah. So that column that you referenced is called In Your Backyard. And that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted to, really get a voice of someone who has lived experience of living on the streets of Silicon Valley. So it was from a group of unhoused individuals, and it used to be a column that would rotate from a few individuals, and then it turned into just one gentleman. And again, he just kind of shared a wide array of different stories of how what local policies have impacted him as an unhoused resident. Now he's tried to get into housing, just the lack of political will from a lot of our local officials when it comes to like approving affordable housing. So it's been a very powerful voice. And that was actually a recommendation we heard from a reader. They wanted to hear from someone with lived experience. So that's been, again, a very powerful, really a first in the nation type of column, hearing from an unhoused resident. And also, as far as our monthly columns, they are standing columns, and they're all from experts in their respective fields. And again, it's a wide array of different topics, everything from housing homelessness to transportation, real estate, local business, the arts, tourism, and hospitality in Silicon Valley. So, and it's just an opportunity for our readers just to hear from not just our reporters, but again from folks who have worked in these respective spaces for several decades and really getting their perspectives.
That's great. And how have you, maybe in terms of like the current landscape, has there been any pivoting that you guys have had to do? Have you been hearing from readers that they're looking, for something different? Have you been feeling different pressures? Some newspapers that shall remain nameless, have implemented what, in my opinion, these very ridiculous, truth meters or, bias meters or things like that. How have you guys been navigating the current climate?
Yeah, sure. And again, as a nonprofit, news organization, we do have tax exempt 501(c)(3) status. So we have to remain, neutral and objective in our reporting. Every year at the start of the year, we do release it's a reader survey where we like to hear from our readers, and it's a pretty good sample size of folks. They give us feedback on how we're doing, with our reporting, and if there are any topics or initiatives that they want to see more reporting on. We certainly take reader input and feedback. Also, when readers, if they're very passionate about a particular topic, we urge them to pen an op-ed, and we do run, reader penned op-eds, pretty regularly. So that's just another way of civic engagement that we urge our readers to get involved. But yeah, that's essentially it. We do, a lot of fact checking in our reporting. Kind of the pitch to publication process is a pretty rigorous one. Whether it's a reporter who pitches a story or if it's pitch, from a local stakeholder or a reader, and we assign it to a reporter. They ensure that they get all voices from all sides in their reporting, we have at least two quotes, again, generally from at least opposing sides, in our reporting. And from there, it's just fact check. We have, two editors who work very tirelessly to ensure that everything is fact checked and looks good, is written well, and they provide edits and it's kicked back to the reporter for them to clean up if they have to make more phone calls or provide more data, whatever they have to do to ensure that the story is complete. And then it's finally published on our news site. And again, we've published now more than 7,000 stories and columns since we launched 6 years ago.
Yeah, that's really impressive. And so, speaking of, how you're deciding to deliver the news, how are you navigating the social media space, and whether there's been a change in that? Because you talked about how news has changed so much, even in the 6 years since you've launched. And I've been hearing, I guess, some buzz about, how the relevance of social media may be changing with current times. I mean, I noticed on the San Jose Spotlight website that you're not on X, and I don't think San Jose Spotlight is alone in, news outlets or other organizations, making a decision to not have their information on that particular platform. I don't know if you want to comment about that, but if you want to comment about like the social media component of getting the word out about news coverage.
Yeah, social media has been a powerful tool when it comes to, getting our, building our brand visibility and, getting our stories out there. A lot of times readers will come across our stories on various platforms. We even now have an audience development specialist who helps us get our stories up on TikTok and doing more video stories. And, we just, we got on Reddit late last year, and they're kind of different than the traditional, X or Facebook or Blue Sky or even Instagram. They're each platform kind of has their own audience and ways that we post. Like in some instances we'll just post the link to our stories, and others will create a graphic and just again try to be more visually appealing. And others, like if we have a reporter going out to cover a demonstration or a protest or something out in the field that's we think would be relevant or interesting to our readers, like we'll have our audience development specialists go out with the reporter to get video and have that and post it on TikTok or Instagram, and really just kind of kind of. And I think that's really, as you alluded to, I think we have seen some shifts in social media that, especially a lot of our young readers, they're gravitating more to video rather than just normal posts where they have to do a lot of reading. I think just that's more of their preference, and we've shifted our reporting to be more multimedia focused rather than just like general social media posts.
Yeah. Do you find that you have a lot of young readers? Because I feel, or subscribers or followers? Because I know that's one of the challenges. I don't know if it's necessarily a challenge, but just one of the aspects, as you were saying, that a lot of young people are getting, their news by following accounts, that they trust, not necessarily because they have an, email subscription to, the daily newsletter from San Jose Spotlight.
Exactly. Yeah, it's still been challenging, attracting young readers. We still find that our top demographic is in from the age of 50 to 64. And that younger generation of 24 to 30, it's still hard to crack. We're still, and we're all digital product. We don't print a newspaper. It's just on our news site. And yeah, I just, as you mentioned, I think, they're used to going to social media to get their news or, other outlets. And, I think a lot of them are subscribing to more national news. I think national news traditionally has been more appealing to to younger readers. So that's been a challenge for sure, is really attracting those folks. But, we're going to keep trying, especially, just through trying and experimenting through different, social media platforms.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And What would you say? I think we've touched on this before, but what would you say to folks? I know there's a lot of folks in my circles, for example, who are really feeling like they're struggling on, what to trust, what are reliable news sources, how to navigate it. So I'm getting not only accurate information, but I'm not getting overwhelmed by how much information is out there. And I want to be informed, but not, depressed. And so, I'm wondering if you can speak to that and how local news, particularly independent and nonprofit, um, sources can meet that need.
Yeah, no doubt. Really interesting question. I think, first by reading, their stories and ensuring that, again, that there's comments from folks on both sides of an argument, ensuring that everything's, fact based. If there's, uh, I know like a lot of local nonprofit news organizations, they do also provide, they also do like fact checking themselves. They have like fact checkers of, elected officials and legislative bodies to ensure that, they're doing what they say and they're carrying out promises that they made. But also kind of just seeing like what, organizations are part of, like, the Institute for Nonprofit News and Lion Publishers. It's the local independent online news publishers. We're members of both organizations. We're also members of the California News Publishers Association, CNPA. It's the largest trade association for journalism throughout the state. So I would urge readers to see if these local publications we have all of them listed on our website. So those are easy and fast ways to ensure that these publications are credible if they're part of these organizations, again, because they have pretty rigorous standards that we all have to follow, and we all follow donor transparency to ensure that our coverage isn't being shaped in any way. It's everything, again, is neutral and unbiased.
Well, and I've never worked for a journalism outlet, but in my experience working for nonprofits, I know that the laws and regulations around what you need to do to maintain your status are quite rigorous. So
For
I can
sure.
see how that impacts in a positive way, probably, your ability to um, have, factual, accurate coverage of issues.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. The IRS would certainly take away our tax exempt status. And from what I hear, it's like extremely hard to get back. So yeah, we're extra diligent to ensure that everything we do is fact based and double checked and ensure that everything looks good before it's published.
And yeah, have you noticed any changes in what in the 6 years that San Jose Spotlight has been operating in terms of what not only like you talked about changes in how readers or subscribers or whatever the right word is are consuming the news and what kind of ways they want to consume it, but also like in terms of topics that are covered. Obviously, you mentioned that you're expanding to more areas of the county, so that must also be driven by interest. But are there certain topic areas, or like I'm sure, as you said, like the pandemic was, people really looking for accurate information probably for a long time about that. But yeah, have you noticed any other trends in what people are interested in reading about?
Yeah, sure. In addition to just the COVID-19 pandemic and or health related stories, I would say diversity. I think DEI is really top of mind for a lot of nonprofit newsrooms, and ensuring that their newsroom, including at Sounds of Spotlight, we're so fortunate and privileged that we're able to embrace so many diverse communities in San Jose and Santa Clara County. So we ensure that we at all times have a Spanish speaking reporter, a Vietnamese speaking reporter. We have a majority female reporter team, and also I know we just had a International Women's Day on Saturday, but now a recent study back in 2021 from the Institute for Nonprofit News found that more than 75% of nonprofit outlets have at least one woman in a top three leadership position. So we're really kind of seeing that shift that our newsrooms, especially in leadership roles, are more diverse culturally, and there's more women of color, and including my wife, Ramona Vargas, who's co-founder and CEO of Sounds and Spotlight. And I think their perspectives are just so important that we're ensuring that all of our sources, when we're reaching out to sources for stories to provide background or provide comments and stories, that we're looking through a lens of diversity, ensuring that it's well rounded, that we have women voices, we have people of color who are commenting on stories, and we get their perspective. It's really important. So I think just that DEI lens, I know it's something that the federal administration isn't excited about, but that's certainly a growing trend we're seeing in nonprofit news throughout the country.
Well, and filling such a need, as you're saying, because, as a lot of the for-profit shops are, I don't know, too scared to just have different perspectives, it's so important that others are filling in the gap. And I mean, it's also just to reflect the local population, right? I mean, for people who may not be familiar, I don't actually know the stats, but Santa Clara County has to be one of the most diverse counties in the entire country. I don't know how it ranks, but it's got to be a very large immigrant population. There's many different languages that are spoken. And as you said, right, one of your top articles recently was around, ICE raids or, ICE presence in the county. And that doesn't surprise me given the demographics of the county. And so, it's also just about, representing who actually lives in the county. So that's really important work. So yeah, I think as we wrap up, like Josh, is there anything else that you want to mention, for listeners? As I know people are like starved for good information and reliable information. And so I hope everyone listening feels like they learned something today. And, whether you now become a, supporter of San Jose Spotlight, which I hope you will, but I hope that this will encourage listeners to like investigate, like who's your local, like nonprofit news outlet, or who are some of the independent media outlets or journalists that you can support that maybe you haven't considered because, it takes probably a little bit more work to find you guys, but I think the coverage is, so important. And as you said, like can cut through so much of the noise that oftentimes is the focus of some of the larger outlets, unfortunately. So yeah, any kind of final thoughts or any reflections you want to share?
Yeah, Natasha, I think you kind of hit the hammer on the nail there. No, I agree. I urge everyone, all your listeners, to find out, what your local news publications are, and if it is a nonprofit, there are several ways to get involved. You can subscribe to their newsletter list and build loyalty that way. And if you feel inclined, like yourself, thank you. I know you've been a supporter since the very beginning. Yeah, to support, in any way you can, whether it's make a donation, sign up for a monthly or annual contribution, write an op-ed, attend an event. Those are great ways to get involved, and it's just a way of igniting civic engagement. I mean, I think that's the overall goal, is just to strengthen our democracy and create a more informed citizenry of our readers in our community, and ensure that they get involved, that they're going out to vote, that they're attending local meetings, local government meetings. They have a better understanding of what their taxpayer dollars are going to, and they know what's going on at their children's schools. So those are really kind of our objectives and what we want to get out in local news. And yeah, you could always just go to the Institute for Nonprofit News website. It's just inn.org. And there's actually a map. You can just type in like where you live, and it'll kind of explain, like list the local nonprofit publications in your area. And I can list a few now. There's Cal Matters, is kind of the gold standard. They do reporting statewide, and they do a lot of reporting in Sacramento, what's going on, at the state level. Here in the Bay Area, there's San Francisco Public Press and uh, Mission Local, both based in San Francisco. And then in the East Bay, there's City Side, and they're kind of the umbrella organization, and they have three publications. They have Berkeley Side, Oakland Side, and Richmond Side in those respective cities. And of course, us San Jose Spotlight down in the South Bay. So those are some good, local nonprofit news publications to get you started. And yeah, we just hope that you continue reading local news and get involved in any way you can.
That's awesome. And thank you for those suggestions on other outlets for people to look into. And I will include some of those in the show notes. So if people don't remember, I'll include that in the show notes. One last thing on the funding model, correct me if I'm wrong. Like if someone's listening, they're like, I really want to support, but I'm not in a position to right now. But even like signing up for your newsletter or like following you guys on social media, that matters too, right? Because like for funders, they're looking at those numbers. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and again, our reporting is free and accessible to all who want to read. It's not a problem. We're fueled by reader donations, but yeah, I mean, again, if you just want to subscribe to our newsletter products, like our daily newsletter, the Daily Spotlight, for example, it's the number one driver of traffic to our news site. And just like getting the print newspaper delivered to your porch every morning, now you just get delivered to your email inbox every morning at 6 a.m. So it's a great way to stay abreast of the news we're producing.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Josh. Thank you so much for all of this information. And as I mentioned to readers, I'll put more information in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. And for all listeners, thanks so much for listening. And we'll see you next time.